There's a cardboard box sitting in a closet somewhere that hasn't been opened since before disco went out of style. Inside it, tangled up with some old buttons and a broken watch, is a piece of jewelry that could be worth thousands of dollars. The exact same box could just as easily end up on a folding table at an estate sale, priced at $3 because nobody bothered to flip the piece over. That's the entire difference between walking away with a small fortune and watching a stranger walk away with yours. It has nothing to do with how big the stone looks or how much it sparkles under a lamp. It comes down to one tiny detail almost everyone skips without even realizing they're skipping it: the small signature stamped into the metal on the back. 5 brands, 1 habit. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which names to search for in your own jewelry box, which pieces look so cheap that most people walk right past them without a second glance, and roughly what each one could actually be worth in today's market. Before we get into the list, build this one habit right now, because everything else in this video depends on it. Turn the piece over, read the back. That's the whole secret hiding underneath nearly a century of costume jewelry. A gorgeous-looking brooch with nothing stamped on it is usually worth a few dollars, no matter how good it looks. The exact same brooch, same design, same year, same materials, but with the right name pressed into the metal can be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars to the right buyer. Nobody in the modern jewelry business has any reason to tell you this. Retail stores make their money selling you new collections, not helping you realize that the box gathering dust in your grandmother's closet might be worth more than anything in their display case. And this isn't some tiny hobby that only a handful of collectors care about. Vintage costume jewelry has become one of the fastest-growing corners of the collectibles market over the last several years, driven by buyers who grew up watching their mothers and grandmothers wear these exact pieces and now have the money to chase them down at auction. That demand is exactly why prices on some of these names have climbed so sharply in such a short window. So let's start with the brand most people assume is worthless simply because it made so much jewelry that common and cheap became the same word in their minds. Number 5. Eisenberg, including both the original mark and the later Eisenberg Ice line. Here's the part almost nobody knows. Eisenberg wasn't originally a jewelry company at all. It started out as a clothing retailer, and the jewelry was only ever meant to be decorative pins sewn onto the garments to help sell the dresses. Customers kept unpinning the jewelry and walking off with just that instead of buying the dress, and eventually the company gave up and turned jewelry into its actual business. Because of that strange origin, the marks changed constantly over the decades. Eisenberg Original from roughly 1938 to 1942. Eisenberg Sterling during the metal-restricted war years. And eventually, Eisenberg Ice, starting in the late 1940s, a name that sounds like a knockoff but is actually the exact opposite. Eisenberg used genuine Austrian crystal with a noticeably higher lead content than its competitors, which is why decades-old Eisenberg rhinestones still catch more light than jewelry made half as long ago. The sterling pieces from the war years are the ones worth hunting hardest for, since they were only produced for a few short years before the company switched back to base metal. A clean, signed Eisenberg Original in pot metal with clear rhinestones commonly sells in the $200 to $400 range, and rare sterling pieces from the 1940s have pushed well beyond that at specialty auctions. One entire private collection sold in a single sale for close to $100,000. One important caution: because the marks changed so many times, and because the brand changed ownership in the 1970s, this is also one of the more commonly reproduced names on the list. A piece that looks right but feels unusually light or thin in the hand deserves a second look before you trust the mark alone. If a piece in your box is stamped ice and you assumed that meant fake, you had it backwards. Number 4. Trifari. This is where the money starts getting serious. Trifari's longtime head designer, Alfred Philippe, insisted that every rhinestone be hand-set into an individual prong rather than glued flat against the metal. That single construction detail is still the easiest way to separate a genuine Trifari piece from a cheaper imitation made the exact same year. Run a finger gently along the setting and you can actually feel the prongs gripping each stone instead of a flat, glued surface. Look on the back for Trifari's crown mark, used consistently across decades of production. Trifari also produced enamel pieces designed to imitate fine gemstones so convincingly that buyers today regularly assume they've found real emeralds or diamonds before they even check the signature. A signed Trifari piece in good condition typically starts around $150, and pieces made with poured glass or unusual stone-cutting techniques have sold for over $4,000 at recent auctions. One enamel and rhinestone necklace, cut to imitate emeralds and diamonds, sold for $3,600 in 2024 alone. Trifari's most famous figural pieces, nicknamed Jelly Bellies by collectors, used a molded lucite body to imitate a polished gemstone inside the shape of an animal, a duck, a fish, a poodle, with the metalwork built around that lucite center rather than sitting on top of it. If you own anything shaped like an animal where the color sits inside the body of the piece rather than painted onto the surface, that's your cue to check the back immediately. Anything with a crown stamped on it is never something to donate without checking first. Number 3. Miriam Haskell. Haskell pieces almost never carry an obvious signature. Most of them have no maker's mark at all because Miriam Haskell wasn't a designer herself. She was the businesswoman who hired talented designers and put her name on the finished product, and a huge number of her pieces went out the door completely unsigned. So identification here comes almost entirely from construction, not from a stamp. Genuine Haskell pieces are hand-wired, one bead and one seed pearl at a time, onto a filigree backing rather than molded or glued the way most competing costume jewelry from the same decades was assembled. Turn a piece over and look closely at the back of the beadwork itself. If you can see individual wire wraps holding each element in place rather than a solid cast backing, that's your signal. A single signed or attributable Haskell necklace with this hand-wired construction has sold in the $950 to $2,400 range depending on the complexity of the beadwork, and complete matching parures, necklace, bracelet, and earrings together have gone even higher at specialty auctions. This is the brand most likely to be sitting in a box marked costume at an estate sale, priced like it's nothing because the seller assumed no signature meant no value. It's one of the clearest examples on this list of why the looks fake instinct is exactly backwards. Number 2. Shriner of New York. If Miriam Haskell teaches you that unsigned doesn't mean worthless, Shriner takes that lesson to the extreme. The overwhelming majority of Shriner pieces were never signed at all. Only the ones made specifically for department stores carry a stamp, while everything made for major fashion houses, including work done for Christian Dior's own runway shows, went out completely unmarked. So how do you identify a piece worth thousands with no name on it anywhere? You look for one deliberately strange design choice. Shriner set many of its rhinestones upside down, point side facing up instead of down, specifically so the stone underneath would pick up and reflect the color of whatever the wearer had on. Combine that with hook and eye construction on the back instead of soldered flat settings, oversized kite-shaped keystone crystals, and dome-shaped brooches in color combinations no other manufacturer of the era was willing to attempt, and you have a piece almost nobody recognizes sitting in plain sight. A single unsigned Shriner necklace with clearly inverted stones has sold for over $2,200, and signed pieces in excellent condition have climbed considerably higher at dedicated vintage jewelry auctions. Shriner is quite literally a brand that was designed to be mistaken for something ordinary, which is exactly why so many pieces slip through unnoticed today. Number 1. Christian Dior's costume jewelry line. Most people hear Christian Dior and think fashion runway, not costume jewelry sitting in a thrift store bin. That gap between expectation and reality is exactly what makes this the most overlooked entry on the entire list. Dior never actually made his own jewelry in-house. Instead, he commissioned some of the finest costume houses of the era to produce it under his name, including workshops like Henkel and Gross and Josette Gripois, which means a single Christian Dior signature on the back can represent work from several different world-class ateliers, depending on the year. The line leaned heavily on genuine Swarovski Aurora Borealis crystal, the rainbow-shifting rhinestone finish introduced in 1955 that changes color depending on the angle of light hitting it, set with a level of precision that costume jewelry rarely received anywhere else. Look on the back for Christian Dior stamped in block letters, sometimes alongside a small copyright symbol and a year, one of the only brands on this list that occasionally tells you exactly when the piece was made. A clean, signed Dior costume piece regularly sells in the $400 range, and design-specific pieces, like a red glass bead necklace created during John Galliano's tenure at the house, have sold for $4,400 at auction. Of everything on this list, Dior is the name most likely to get mistaken for a modern department store knockoff by someone who has genuinely never looked at the back. So what actually connects all 5 of these names? Every single one of them made jewelry designed to imitate something more expensive than it actually was. Glass pretending to be emerald, plated metal pretending to be gold, rhinestone pretending to be diamond, and that exact quality is what makes them so easy to dismiss today. If a piece looks fake, most people stop right there and assume the story is over. But looking fake was the entire design goal for every brand on this list. The imitation was the point, and decades later, that same imitation, done well by the right hands, is worth real money to collectors who know exactly what they're looking at. Run back through those 5 names for a second and notice the pattern in how each one hides. Eisenberg hides behind a word, ice, that sounds like an insult instead of a compliment. Trifari hides in plain sight behind a crown most people never think to look for. Haskell hides behind having no mark at all. Schreiner hides behind a deliberately upside-down stone that looks like a manufacturing mistake instead of a signature style. And Dior hides behind the assumption that a name this famous couldn't possibly be sitting in a bargain bin. Every one of them is hiding for a different reason, and every one of them is found the exact same way. Now let's be completely honest, because that's the only reason this works. Not every piece from these 5 brands is worth a fortune, and it would be dishonest to let you believe otherwise. Condition changes everything. Missing stones, tarnish, and cracked enamel can cut a piece's value down to a small fraction of what a clean example brings. Rarity matters just as much. And on the more valuable brands especially, signatures have occasionally been added to lesser pieces or reproduced outright. So if you genuinely believe you've found something significant, it's worth having an independent appraiser confirm it before you try to sell. But here's the math that makes this worth your time anyway. Turning a piece over and reading the back costs you nothing. No appointment, no fee, no expertise, just 30 seconds in decent light. Selling a genuine Schreiner necklace or a real Miriam Haskell piece for $2 at a yard sale because nobody bothered to check costs you everything that piece was actually worth. So before anything else from that box goes into a donation bag, a scrap pile, or a $5 folding table in somebody's driveway, take the time to flip every single piece over and actually read what's stamped into the back.